Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our second Center for Japanese lecture for fall 2024. My name is Yoshihiro Mochizuki. I'm a teaching professor of Japanese language at the Department of Asian Languages and Cultures. And it is my pleasure to introduce a distinguished speaker for today. But before we begin, I'd like to make a couple of announcements from CJS. Okay, so this is my cheat sheet. First, please join us next week on September 26th for our next lecture in the fall 2024 CJS Thursday noon lecture series, Democracy on Edge, Japan's Atsumi Peninsula during the Allied occupation, given by Professor Emma O'Dwyer. And then, second, for those attendees joining the webinar, webcams and microphones have been muted, but we invite you to use the Q&A function during the lecture to submit any question you have. And our presenter will try to address as many as possible. The live transcription feature, closed captions, is enabled. If you would rather not have it, go to the bottom right corner and disable it. And finally, please check out our CJS events page or various social media pages for more CJS events in fall 2024. Okay, back to the introduction. So we are honored to have with us Professor Ann Crescini, or An-chan, as I fondly call her. And so An-chan, sorry. I first had the privilege of meeting An-chan at the American Translator Association annual conference last year, where she was the distinguished speaker for the Japanese language division. And as I watched her speak, I have this nagging feeling that she looked so familiar. Then I realized I was actually following her on Twitter, and she has so many followers and very prominent on Twitter. And after her captivating presentation, I took the opportunity to invite her to speak here at the University of Michigan, and I'm thrilled that she graciously accepted, and here she is. Professor Ann Crescini is a renowned expert in Japanese studies with a particular fascination for wasei-eigo, Japanese-made English. Originally from the Commonwealth of Virginia, Professor Crescini has made Japan her home for the past 24 years. Which is about the time I moved to the United States, so we practically switched our position. Professor Crescini has been teaching classes on communication, presentation, and writing for the past 19 years at the University of Kitakyushu, based in Fukuoka Prefecture. She wears many hats beside her academic career, such as TV and radio commentator, writer, and blogger. Her bilingual blog, An-chan Kara Miru Nippon, An-chan's View of Japan, has gained national attention for its insightful commentary on language and culture, uniquely presented in both English and Hakata dialect. Her insights and engaging personality have made her a prominent figure in Japanese media. Her work spans a wide range of topics from Japanese culture to English language learning, that she has authored several books, four of which I have brought here today. So today she will be speaking to us about Japanese English, wasei-eigo. Given her expertise and engaging style, I'm certain we can look forward to enlightening and entertaining session. So without further ado, please join me in giving a warm welcome to Professor Ann Crescini.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out to hear me talk. I rarely give lectures in English, so I'm a little bit nervous, even though I'm a native speaker. So I'm going to talk to you today about Japanese English. So I want to give a little bit of a Japanese English quiz to you guys. But if you are a native Japanese speaker, please don't answer. Okay, this is only for people who don't really speak Japanese. I want to see if you can understand these words. I'm going to pronounce them in Japanese, and I want to see if you can understand what they are. Okay, you ready? All right. First one is magic tape. Magic tape. Anybody know what magic tape might be? Any idea?
Like cello tape?
Nope. That you would think it would be that, right? Yeah, that's what a lot of people think. Magic. In English, you would say magic tape, but in Japanese, it's pronounced magic tape. Anybody know? No clue? This is Japanese word for Velcro. It's a great word, right? It's magic, right? Okay. Next one. American dog. American dog. Anybody know what an American dog is? If you know, please tell me. If you're a Japanese student, that's fine too. All right, go ahead.
Corn dog.
A corn dog. That's right. American dog. Yeah. All right. Next one. Let's see. This one, I will open this one up for even Japanese speakers because I bet native Japanese speakers don't know this one either. Ready? This is the most difficult one. If you know this, you are a genius. All right. Here we go. Door punch. Look at the Japanese speakers' faces are all confused. Door punch. Anybody know? You can't answer. You know the answer. Anybody know what door punch is? This is when you're in the parking lot and you open your door and you hit the car beside you with the door because the wind blows. They call that in Japanese door punch. It's one of my favorites. Okay. Next one. Let's see. Paper driver. Anybody know what a paper driver is? What do you think a paper driver would be? Use your imagination.
At my age, I don't have any idea.
At your age, you have no idea. Anybody know?
Someone who had the driver's license.
That's right.
Paper driver, that's right.
Yeah, usually because they have they're scared or they're kind of like no confidence, right? All right. Next one. Shutter chance. Shutter chance. Anybody know this one? This in English is a photo op, a chance to get a picture. Shutter chance. Now, this is my favorite Japanese English word in the whole world. Okay, you ready for this one? Pipe cut. Everybody's laughing. All the Japanese people are laughing. This is what inspired me to study Japanese English. Actually, I heard this word and I'm like, this is the most creative word I've ever heard in my whole life. And it inspired me to study Japanese English. Anybody have any ideas? A pipe cut. This is the Japanese word for a vasectomy. Isn't it awesome? It's amazing, isn't it? So this is just a bit of a hint of what Japanese English is. I'm going to get into more detail later about what it is and how it's used in the language and why. And is it weird English or is it creative Japanese? This is split in Japan. Some people think it's weird English. Some people think it's great Japanese. And I'm going to talk about why I think it's creative Japanese and why it's a crucial part of the Japanese language. But first of all, I want to talk just a little bit about myself. You promised me this worked and it's not working. Oh, there we go. Other way. Okay, so I'm from Wytheville, Virginia, which is a very rural town in southwestern Virginia, near Virginia Tech University. I never had any experience with Japan or anything before I moved to Japan. I mean, right now I do a lot of things. I'm a TV commentator. I write books and columns. I do radio and stuff. But when I first moved to Japan in 1997, I also did a couple of TED Talks. So if you have a chance to see them, please check them out. But when I moved to Japan in 1997, I lived in the city of Kobe for 3 years. I knew absolutely zero Japanese and I knew nothing about Japanese culture. I was 24 years old when I moved to Japan. I knew nothing about Japan or Japanese culture. Probably a lot of you are interested in manga and anime and cosplay and stuff like that, and you want to move to Japan when you get older. I had zero interest in any of those. I was only interested in my boyfriend who got hired to teach as an ALT in Japan. So that's why I moved to Japan. It's not a very romantic story. I mean, I had no interest in Japan. I just had interest in him. So that's why I moved to Japan. And when I moved to Japan, I had a really hard time adjusting. Terrible culture shock. I hated the food. I mean, I'm from Virginia. Like a fish is something you see in an aquarium. It's not something they eat. Right. And so I hated the food. The houses are just freezing cold in Kyushu. In Kobe too. There's no central heating. And so I would get like frostbite on my toes and everything. It was just miserably cold. I hated the food. I had no friends. But of course, the Japanese language was the biggest problem for me. I couldn't speak the language at all. And, Japanese are not very famous for their English ability. So it was really hard for me to survive in that environment. And I hated Japan so much, I had no interest in studying the language because I'm not going to be here long. I can just leave. But one day I moved from my host family apartment to my own apartment. And I decided I'm going to be like a Japanese person and I'm going to do that famous like greeting that they do to their neighbors when they move. Right? It's very famous in Japan. You go to the store and you buy something very practical as a gift, like dishwashing detergent or cooking oil, something Americans would not be happy to get at all, right? We want homemade cookies or cheesecake or something. But I bought some dishwashing detergent and I practiced this famous Japanese phrase, "Sumaranai mono desu ka?" which means, sorry for this pitiful gift I'm about to give you. And I was ready and I knocked on the door and they said, who is it? And I couldn't answer the question because I couldn't speak Japanese. And so I paused for a while and then I said, "Gaijin desu," which means I'm a foreigner. It's the only word I knew, that and where's the bathroom. Those are the only two words I knew. And it was just a huge turning point in my life. You know, I was like, if I'm going to live in this country and have any kind of joy, I'm going to have to study Japanese a little bit. So the next day I decided to study Japanese and I became just fascinated by the Japanese language. The connection between the language and the culture was just incredibly fascinating. Why are these words in Japanese that I can't translate into English? Why do we not have the word yoroshiku onegaishimasu in English? You can't live in Japan without the word yoroshiku onegaishimasu. You say it like 100 times a day. But in English, we don't have it. It means like, please do me the favor of what you're going to be doing for me somehow in the future, please, kind of, is kind of what it means, right? We don't have that word. It's all based on cultural differences. Every time you can't translate a word well, it's because the culture or the society or the worldview is different. It's always going to be found in that, you know? And so I became just fascinated with the Japanese language. And I studied like crazy. And in 2005, I passed the N1 of the Japanese proficiency exam. But after that, I met Japanese English. And Japanese English is very, very misunderstood in Japan. It's very, very misunderstood. People think a lot of people think it's stupid. A lot of people think it's childish. They think it's embarrassing. And I used to be that way too. When I first moved to Japan, I was very American. I had my American glasses on and I was looking at Japanese culture through them. And so I would see Japanese English and I would laugh at it. And I'll take a picture and put it on social media and tell all my friends, look at this weird word. Isn't it a weird word? And I would make fun of it because I thought it was a stupid word. Why is that? Because I, as a native speaker, had this unconscious, condescending. I was looking down. I was looking down on Japanese culture because I'm a native English speaker. Please use my language properly, right? So that's how I was looking at it. But then I had this epiphany that I had later on, and I'm going to talk about that later. But before I talk about Japanese English, I want to talk about the Japanese vocabulary in general, because this background is very important. Japanese, let me ask the Japanese language speakers, what are the 3 kinds of vocabulary in Japanese? 3 kinds of words based on their origin. There's 3 different kinds, you know? What are they? Wago, kango, and gaidaigo, right? There's 3 words, wago, kango, and gaidaigo. There's 3 types of vocabulary in Japanese. Wago are native Japanese words. They're also called Yamato no kotoba, right? They've been in Japan for a long time. Usually words that are, for example, for people who speak Japanese, something like, for example, konyu suru would be kango and kao would be wago, right? So it's something, the words borrowed from China are called kango, and they're usually 2 kanjis together, right? And the gaidaigo are words borrowed from countries other than China, okay? So these 3 different kinds of words make up the Japanese vocabulary. Now, about 50% of the Japanese vocabulary is kango, about 30% is wago, and about 20% is gaidaigo. Now, if you think about it, do you think that's a lot or is that a little? 20%, do you think that's a lot? It's a lot. If you compare it to other languages, who don't take a lot of loan words in languages like French or Indonesian, 20% is an incredibly high amount of loan words. Just try to imagine speaking an entire day without using a loan word in Japanese. I think you would find it quite impossible. You know, even before you eat breakfast, you're like, what do you want to eat for breakfast? Pan. Pan. I can't say pan. That's a loan. Apple juice.
That's right.
Butter. Butter mo dame. Yogurt mo dame. Right? So you find that you can't say anything because they're such a huge part of the language and they're so ingrained in the language that you can't have a conversation without them. Okay? So these loan words are, generally speaking, the earliest loan words were from Portuguese, right? Because they had Portuguese missionaries and Portuguese in Kyushu in the 16th century, right? And so the earliest loan words from Portuguese. But then Japan closed its borders during the Sakoku period, and the words from Dutch became very prevalent during that period. But then after the Meiji Restoration, English became incredibly there's a lot of English words that came into Japanese in the Meiji Restoration. It's said now that 80% of the current loan words in Japanese are from English, right? But, you know, we humans have a lot of, you know, I'm really having trouble saying English words. We have a lot of preconceptions, a lot of things that we just assume. We have a lot of assumptions. That's the word. We have a lot of assumptions. So a lot of Japanese will look at a katakana word, a word written in the katakana alphabet, and they'll think, oh, that's an English word, right? They think every katakana word written in the katakana alphabet is English, right? And so my students will say to me, I hate piman. And I'll be like, what's piman? And they're like, piman. And I know piman's French. In English, we say green pepper, right? So they think piman is an English word, you know? And so they'll say, I hate piman. Or they'll say, I have my arubaito today. Arubaito is the word for part-time job, but it's from German, right? So there's this assumption that every foreigner in America, in Japan, is American, right? And every katakana word is English, right? So these are all things I'm trying to bust down, you know. There's a lot of things I'm trying to bring about more of an understanding about diversity into Japan, especially, you know, regarding, you know, people and language, right? So, you know, why do Japanese people speak to foreigners in English? Why do you think? Because they assume that all foreigners are English speakers, right? But in reality, only 40% of foreigners in Japan can even speak English. 60% of foreigners in Japan can speak Japanese. So Japanese is more understood. But for some reason, Japanese people who can't speak English speak in English to people who can't, foreigners who can't speak English. And everybody's miserable, right? So I always speak to everybody that I meet in Japanese first, because I don't know where they're from. They could be born in Japan, but look like me. Who knows, right? So I'm trying to, and it's the same thing with language. You can't look at a word written in the katakana thing and assume that it's English, because a lot of times it's not. So what is gairaigo or loan words? These are words that are written in the katakana script, and the meaning is the same as the original language. The pronunciation has been changed so Japanese people can pronounce it only, okay? So for example, computer is pronounced computer, smartphone is smartphone, ice cream, ice cream, pizza is very similar. Coffee is coffee, McDonald's, McDonald's, right? And video camera is video camera, right? So the meaning is the same, but the pronunciation is different, okay? This is a loan word, right? There's a lot of loan words, of course, in English from other countries as well, right? So it's not an uncommon thing. The uncommon thing is the sheer number of loan words that are in Japanese. Now, these are words that are not from English. Japanese elementary school students wear what is called a randoseru, which is a very sturdy leather backpack. And they use it for 6 years, and it costs like $500-600, right? But this is a word that actually came from Dutch. It came into Japan in the 1900s, and in the early days, it was a bag used by soldiers. But then it eventually turned into a bag used by elementary school students. So this is from Dutch. It's for randoseru. Another word, karute, is a medical chart. Much of the medical words in Japanese are from German. It's very common. And like I spoke earlier, the arubaito, the part-time job, comes from the German word arbeit, which means to work, right? And then the oldest Japanese word, the oldest loan word is bread, from Portuguese. Came into Japanese in the 16th century with the Portuguese missionaries. So you can't look at a loan word and you can't think, oh, this is English, right? Most of them are. It's pretty safe to assume that most of them are, but they're not always going to be like that. And then there's some words that are not written in katakana that are actually loan words. Words like tempura, right? Tempura is a loan word as well. Tempura is a loan word, as well as ponzu. My kids love ponzu sauce. It's their favorite thing in the world. That's also a loan word. And Hakata Dontaku, which is a festival that happens every year. It's also a word from Dutch, which means kyujitsu, oyasumi, holiday. It means holiday. So there's all these. Do you guys know the word handon? You know the word handon, which means like you work for half of the day. That don is actually from dontaku, which means yasumi, day off. So it actually means a half day. So even that word, it's half Japanese and it's half loan word. These kind of half Japanese, half loan words are very common as well. There's other words like kintore, which is kinniku training or weightlifting, right? This is also a half Japanese, half loan word. There's a lot of words like that. They're very, very interesting. They're very interesting, isn't it? Language, don't you think? Yeah. So what is Japanese English? Let me ask you guys, what is Japanese English to you? What's your image of Japanese English? You guys who know what it is. Oh, you guys are like my students.
It's a dialect of it's one of the world Englishes.
Okay, it's a world English. That's good. Okay, what else? So you think it's English then?
Yeah, it's spoken globally.
Okay, so you think it's English, okay? Anyone else know what? Hi.
Maybe it wouldn't be good to define it this way, but defining it in terms of that perspective that you shared at the very beginning, where it's English that a native English speaker would say, no, that's not.
Okay,
It's
so
not my English, therefore it's something else.
so to you it's not English.
Well, I'm saying, yeah,
There's no correct answer here.
this might be a perspective.
Okay, so that's your perspective. Anyone else?
Yeah, I guess I would say, I mean, yeah, maybe like for English speakers, it definitely obviously sounds like English, and maybe for Japanese people too. A lot of those loan words that come from English speaking countries, maybe like you said, they assume it's English, so it's like English. But functionally, it's Japanese essentially.
Okay, so you think it's Japanese?
Yeah, because you still combine like verb endings with a lot of these katakana like loan words. So I would still say it functions as any other.
So you think it's Japanese? Okay.
Yeah,
Maybe English words used for Japanese purposes.
English words used for Japanese purposes. Good. Anyone else? These are all very good answers. So that's actually the topic of this talk, right? Is it Japanese or is it English, right? Japanese English is like, so I talked about earlier, these are loan words, right? These are loan words. So what is exactly some examples of Japanese English? So for example, sharpen, mechanical pencil, comes from sharp pencil, right? It's called a sharpen. Trainer is a sweatshirt, right? One piece is a dress. And baby car. This is also one of my favorites, is a stroller, okay? These are all examples of loan words. So that's how is Wasei Eigo, Japanese English, different from loan words? It's that they're, generally speaking, most Japanese English is not understood or not used by native speakers. Sometimes we can kind of figure out what it means, right? If you hear what a baby car, you might be like, that's probably a stroller, right? But you would never say, oh, can you buy me a baby car, right? You would never say that as a native speaker. But these are words that a lot of Japanese think that they're English words. And so when they go to English-speaking countries, they'll use them as English. And that's another assumption that we need to get rid of, right? So does that make Japanese English a bad guy? The fact that it confuses English learners. This is one of the criticisms of Japanese English, is that it's an obstacle to English learning, right? It's an obstacle to English learning because there's all these words that Japanese people make up, and it confuses people, and they don't know how to speak proper English because of these words that are just a huge, like, embarrassment to Japanese people. There's a lot of people who have this opinion in Japan, right? And I used to be that way too, because, I used to think, well, how are they going to learn English if they think all these words are English? But is that really Japanese English's fault that people assume that they're English? If you think about it, really, like people don't blame the French for confusing us how to speak baguette, right? I'm sure we don't say baguette. I'm sure is there any French speakers in here? How do you really say baguette?
Baguette.
That's kind of similar. But anyway, you don't confuse, like you can't blame a person's inability to distinguish. You can't blame the Japanese English for that, right? So for my stance is, well, an English learner, it's their responsibility to learn that this is not English, right? They need to be able to differentiate between real English. And that's something that only an English learner can do. Another thing is, people who are in the English learning community in Japan have this assumption that everyone in Japan cares about English, right? That's also very untrue. A very small percentage of the Japanese population give a hoot about English. If you're surrounded by people in the English speaking community, or people or teachers or people in academia, you think, well, everybody loves English like me, and we want to protect English from this weird Japanese English. But most Japanese people don't care at all about English. They just are speaking Japanese, and they don't really care if this is a loan word or Japanese English at all. So we tend to be influenced, I think, by the people around us. And we think that what we think is normal or the common opinion. But I think there's a lot of stereotypes and a lot of assumptions that we need to as humans, just to get rid of and try to see things from an objective perspective. So that's what I tried to do. One day I was, reading about Japanese English, and I found it interesting, but I always saw it as very childish. I mean, baby car, that's very childish. Stroller is much more cool, right? But why was I criticizing it? Because I thought it was weird English. Okay. But then one day I was reading an academic paper about Japanese English, and I came across this sentence that rocked my world. And it said, Japanese English isn't English, it's Japanese. And this just kind of rocked my world and changed how I saw things. Because then I thought, well, if Japanese English isn't English, but it's Japanese, then I have zero right to criticize it as a native English speaker, right? Because it's Japanese, and I need to learn Japanese English just like I would study kanji, just like I would study idioms, just like I would study grammar, because it's a Japanese, an important part of Japanese language, right? So it just really it made me rethink how I view language and how I view everything that I do. We as academics and researchers always need to have open hearts and be humble that maybe we're wrong. Maybe what we think is wrong. Maybe what we've been researching or thinking all along has been wrong. And for me, this whole, the most important thing I've learned during the whole time in my whole time in Japan is this: maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I don't have enough understanding of this person. Maybe it's my fault. Thinking about this possibility every day has really helped me to be a better friend, a better researcher, and a better teacher. So this is something that Japanese English has actually changed my life. And if I had 5 hours, I would be able to tell you how. But today I'm going to try to do it very, very, very quickly. So Japanese English, in my opinion, people don't agree with me, and that's fine, because we live in a world where everyone has their own opinions and we need to respect them. A lot of people don't agree with me. They think it's evil and it kills English study, and that's fine if they have that opinion. But for me, I'm looking at it from a perspective that is Japanese, right? It's Japanese, and so I studied it just like I would study how kanji affects Japanese English or the Japanese people's communication patterns. Okay, so these are some examples of Japanese English. Baby bed is a crib. Baby beto. Earrings are called piatsu, ears. Consento is an outlet or a plug. This is from an old English word called concentric plug. Soft cream, soft serve ice cream. Open car. This is my favorite one. After I like Haikut the best, but this is number 2. Open car, convertible, right? It's actually quite practical if you look at it, right? It makes a lot of sense. It's very similar to kanji, right? Kanji is very practical. Like you look at the kanji and it's like, you look at the kanji and you're like, oh, that's easy to understand the meaning from the kanji. Japanese English is very similar to that. So Japanese people, their English is criticized all over the place. Japanese people can't speak English. But it's actually, waseigo exists because Japanese people can speak English. If Japanese people couldn't speak English, there would be no waseigo. Because almost all waseigo is formed out of words that every Japanese speaker can understand, right? Very simple words. Open, car, baby, girl, my, point, get, boy, man. All of these easy words that Japanese people can understand, whether they can speak English well or not. They study English for 6 years in school. So all Japanese people have a basic vocabulary of English, right? So Japanese English words all come from these simple words. Baby and bed. Every Japanese person knows those words, right? So I actually find them to be quite fascinating. So why is there Japanese English? Has anyone ever thought about this besides me? I think about it all day long because I love it. But I mean, you have katakana, right? Japanese has 3 alphabets: kanji, hiragana, katakana. The katakana is mainly used for loan words. So you already have this alphabet, right? So why don't you just take a word from another language and just throw it into katakana? Why do you have to make these incredibly creative, interesting words? What's the purpose? Now, I've thought about this and I've looked into it a lot, and I've come up with 3 possible reasons that waseigo, Japanese English, exists. It's easy to pronounce, it's easy to understand, and it's easy to visualize. Okay, so let's look at the running machine in Japanese. This is called a running machine. Okay, everyone knows in this room who speaks English knows in English we call it a treadmill, right? So in Japanese, if you say toredomiru, maybe they'll be able to catch that. But if you say in English pronunciation, treadmill, nobody can catch that because it's treadmill. And they're like, huh? What did you say? Nobody can understand that. So they can't catch it, and then they can't say it. What did you say? They can't catch it, they can't say it, and then they can't visualize what it is. If you tell someone a baby car, they'll be like in their head, they're thinking, baby car, akachan, kuruma, stroller. They'll think of a baby and a car. But if you say, try to visualize a treadmill, they'll be like, treadmill, I wonder what that is. They have no idea what that is. So it actually has it's not random and it's not childish. It's a very complicated aspect of Japanese vocabulary, if you think about it, And so let's imagine the baby car, okay? You say to a Japanese person, can you put the baby in the stroller? They'll be like, the what? Stroller. Japanese people hate R's and L's, and there's 4 in the word stroller. There's 4. What a horrible word to put into katakana. Sutorora. Right? So that's a terrible word. So let's make baby car. We can say it, we can understand it, and it's a baby in a car. What's a stroller? I have no idea. But I know what a baby car is, right? It's actually very practical if you think about it. So, a lot of people think Japanese people just randomly just take English and just throw it around, but they don't. It's actually very practical, and it has a very specific purpose. In other words, it's a communication tool for Japanese speakers. It's not weird English. It's not childish English. It's not strange English. It's a communication tool for Japanese speakers. But there are words you got to be careful about. They have meanings that are different in English and Japanese. Okay. One day, my kid, when she was in 2nd grade, she comes home from elementary school and she says, "Mommy, we're running in a marathon tomorrow. Can you come watch?" And I was like, "What? You're in the 2nd grade and you're running a marathon?" Couldn't believe it. About passed out from shock. And the reason is, in Japanese, a marathon, that doesn't mean that it's a 26-mile run like it does in English. It's just a race. It just means a foot race. Usually like a kilo or 2 maybe, right? So I didn't know that, and I was so shocked. I'm like, Japanese are so Japanese people are cool. Like, they're so into sports, they make 2nd graders run marathons, right? Thought that was so cool. Another word is this juice. The word juice is very interesting. Sensei, if I said, go to the store and buy some juice for the party, what would you buy?
Coke.
You would buy Coke, right? Sensei, what would you buy? Pepsi, right? Right? This word juice, you like Pepsi better than Coke. I love Pepsi. Yeah. So this word juice, in English and in Japanese officially, it's 100% fruit juice is what it's supposed to mean. But in Japanese, language is living, right? Language is always changing, right? So in Japanese, as generations have gotten younger and younger, right? It's changed into this word that just means anything that's not pink, right? So I asked my daughter, she's 19 and she's lived her whole life in Japan, and I asked her, I said, I've been after this meaning of this word juice. What is it? And she paused and she thought, juice is something that it's not tea or coffee. It's in a plastic bottle and it's bad for you. I'm like, that's a great definition of juice. So, Coke, sports drinks like Pocari Sweat, Mitsuya cider, carbonated drinks, everything to a young person is juice, except tea. That's not juice. Unless it has sugar in it, then it might be juice. Stuff like gogo no kocha and stuff like that. So, and then the mansion, which is like an apartment in a high-rise building, is, of course, you can confuse that terribly if you're not careful, right? You come to the States, I live in a mansion. Everyone's like, cool, can I go use your pool, right? So these are all kinds of words. There's all kinds of other words, like, for example, coming out. In the US, it's mainly used to, say you're part of the LGBT community, whereas in Japan, it's used to reveal any secret, right? So like one day my friend said to me, oh, I came out to my kids that there's no Santa Claus or something. And I'm like, wow, they use it like that too. It was very, very interesting. And so anytime you reveal any secret in Japan, they say coming out to shimashita, which I thought was quite interesting too. So there's a lot of words that have different meanings in English and Japanese, which you got to be careful about that you don't confuse them. But this is all the responsibility of the language learner. This is not Japanese English's fault or Japanese fault. If you get confused, it's your fault. Don't blame Japanese English or foreign loan words. You need to study and learn the difference of them, right? So these are some of my favorites. Handokiba, designated driver. Isn't that a great word? This, however, is not known by people in Tokyo because they don't drive. This is only known in people who live in rural areas who drive. My bagu is a personal shopping bag. This word "my" is actually very interesting. They use my bagu, my pace, my bloom, my home, my car. These are all used. A lot of people misunderstandingly translate it as watashi no, but it's not watashi no. It's jibun no, which is very different. It doesn't mean I. It means one's own, right? So if you go to the supermarket, she'll say to you, "My bag o mochi desu ka?" Right? She's not saying, "Do you have my bag?" She's saying, "Do you have your own bag?" Right? Like sometimes I want to go, "Yes, my bag o mottemasu." Yes, I have my bag. I have my bag. Yeah. So this is a very interesting word. And then French fries are called fried potato in Japanese. But recently the young ones, they don't like to talk a lot, so they just call it potatoes now. They say, that happens in every language, right? You want to just shorten everything because talking is mendokusai, right? Pain in the neck, right? Then there's baby bed, magic tape. Anchi is a word for hater, online hater, or an online comment. Pet bottle or plastic bottle. Paper driver, I talked to ice candy is a popsicle. There's a lot of really cool words that I've found in Japanese English. And then there's the young people words that I'm totally crazy about here. They like to put the Japanese verb ending ru on a loan word. And for example, takushi noru is takuru, right? Take a taxi. To Google something, you say guguru, right? Memoru is to take notes. Raguru is like a game is slow. You say it's ragutteru. If something is buggy, you say bagutteru. Tapioca. Tapioca is the word for bubble tea in Japanese, or boba. So to drink tapioca is tapiru. But this is kind of a dead word now because they don't drink tapioca much anymore, or bubble tea much anymore. Bazuru means to go viral. This comes from the word buzz in English. To go viral, they say bazuraretai or something like that. I want to make that video go viral. Bazuraretai. Sambaru, to be on standby. Rimuru, this is one of my favorites, to unfollow or unfriend someone on social media. This comes from the word remove from English. Rimurareta. They'll often say that. Dizuru, to go to Disneyland. I like this one. And disuru comes from the English word dis or disrespect, to throw shade at somebody. You say, disurareta, or something like that. But this just shows the incredible flexibility of Japanese English. It is just fascinating. The different, people say Japanese people are not creative and they just remember things, rote learning or whatever. That is crazy. I mean, the words, especially the young ones, all the high school kids and college kids, the words they come up with are just fascinating. Like my kids, like every day they come home and I'm just like, where did that teach me a new word? Because they just come up with just the most brilliant words. So that is language. Language is alive. It's learning. It's alive. It's living. And these words are probably some of them will disappear and some of them will remain. Probably Tapido is almost completely gone from Japanese because back during COVID, bubble tea was very popular, but now nobody really drinks it. So if a word is not needed anymore, it disappears, right? That's how language works. During COVID, we had all these words in Japanese, like stay home, or what else we use? Social distance, or, they had all these words, but nobody hears them anymore because they're gone, right? So words are a very, they're very fluid, they come in when you need them and they leave when you don't need them. And so we as people, and I as a linguist, a linguist and a teacher have totally different roles in life, right? A linguist looks at language and how it's used and describes it, whereas a teacher teaches the so-called correct way of speaking something, right? But both of them are very, very, very important, I think, right? Would you rather speak correct language or would you rather speak language that people actually use, right? It is another question you have to think about. My mother always tells me, don't end a sentence with a preposition. But I'm like, it sounds weird not to end a sentence with a preposition sometimes, right? So these sort of things are very similar in Japanese language. Like, if you're studying Japanese, right, you learn that there's two kinds of adjectives, right? There's nakeoshi and there's ikeoshi, right? There's e adjectives and there's not adjectives. And then you put, when you want to make it negative, you put kunai on the adjectives and you put janai on not adjectives, right? And so you learn samukunai, oishikunai, utsukushikunai, genki janai, kirei janai, right? So you learn all these and you're like, oh, this is perfect. And then you go to Japan and someone says, are kirei kunai? And you're just like, what? I thought kirei was janai. Kirei kunai? And then someone will say something like, kirei kunakunakunai? And you're just like, huh? Right? This is how people use language. It's real, alive language, right? And so sometimes you sound more like a native speaker if you speak grammatically incorrect Japanese, right? And I think that's fine because that's how language works, If you just, textbook Japanese is very important. You have to have that base of grammar. You have to have that foundation. So I would never in a million years criticize textbook Japanese because that's how I learned Japanese was through textbooks, But at the same time, you also have to listen to those around you and how language is used in reality, right? You learn in Japanese that it's like this. 昨日私は神戸で寿司を食べた, right? But that's not how native speakers speak. They'll be like, あ、昨日さ、行ったよ、神戸。で、そこでさ、寿司食べて美味しかった. They'll talk like that, They don't speak in the way that you'll learn in textbooks. So looking at Japanese English is the same way, let's enjoy language. Let's not think, well, this is right and this is wrong. Let's see how creative it is and just enjoy it and see how we can learn from it and how it can teach us. So why did Japanese English change my life? Only it's just the last few minutes to talk about that. When I learned that Japanese English wasn't English, it rocked my world and it made me think, well, I wonder if there's anything else in Japanese culture that I'm misunderstanding that I think I understand as an English speaker. And I decided that I was going to reevaluate how I view the entire culture. At this point, I'd been there for 16 years, and I'm like, I'm going to reevaluate how I view everything, and I'm going to try to look at it from an even perspective instead of looking at it from an American perspective. So, I'm a very typical American country girl raised in the Bible Belt of the U.S. I go to Japan with those lenses on my face, and I looked at Japan for a really long time through those lenses. And then about 6 years ago, I met my best friend in the whole world. Her name is Makiko. And we have nothing in common. Nothing. She's from Kyoto and is like this really traditional Japanese person. Can't speak a word of English. We have different religious views. We have different values. We have different hobbies. We have nothing in common. But for some reason, every now and then you get that great best friend that just appears once or twice in your life, and that's who she was to me. We would stay up until the middle of the night eating ice cream and we'd have family slumber parties, and it was just so fun. But we would fight all the time about how we raise the kids and about food. Our views about those two things were quite different. And I was so frustrated because I'm just like, I had spent my whole life studying Japan, studying Japanese culture. I've written a lot of books, but why can I not understand this person from Japan? And then I realized that I understood the language and the culture, but I was missing something that was not giving me a full view of Japan. And that was the worldview of Japan. I didn't understand the Japanese worldview. I was looking at Japan through my American and Christian worldview. And when you do that, you can't see Japan correctly, nor can you understand Japanese culture or the Japanese language if you're doing that. If you look at it from a very simple perspective, culture is what, and worldview is why people do things. It's very easy to understand the what. Japanese people do this. Japanese people sleep with their children. Almost everyone. Most Americans don't. Why is that? That why is the worldview, right? And unless you know the why, you're going to have a critical heart. And you're going to be criticizing because you're going to be looking at their what through your lenses. And to you, because you wouldn't do it, it's strange, or it's crazy, or it's weird, right? But if you start looking at, you take off your lenses and you put on their lenses and you look at it through their lenses, you're going to be able to see why they do what they do. And when you can understand that why, the critical spirit just dissipates. And you're like, wow, that makes a lot of sense. That's why they do that. I get it. And you lose that I'm better than you, or my culture is better than you, or my religion is better than you. You lose that critical spirit when you see that. And this is like a transformation that I went through about 8 years ago that totally changed how I study, how I parent, how I have all my, how I interact with people. And it totally made me a brand new person, I think. And I hope a better person. And if you look at the word itadakimasu in Japanese, everyone knows this word, right? Everyone knows that Japanese people say itadakimasu before they eat. And then after they eat, they say gochusou-sama deshita. And I knew that, and I knew vaguely that there is something to do with the Shinto worldview, and it had something to do with nature. I had this vague understanding of that. But I always thought itadakimasu was very similar to let's eat, right? Because there's no translation of itadakimasu, sometimes we as humans tend to just give the closest translation that we can think of, right? So there's no translation for itadakimasu. So we just say, oh, it's kind of like let's eat, right? And so I had that in the back of my head for my whole life. And I had, for 25 years, I struggled with an eating disorder. And when I was in high school, I was really overweight, but I played basketball. And my coach said, you need to lose some weight if you're going to be a good basketball player. So I lost like 40 pounds in like 2 months. And I became super popular. And I was the popular girl at school, and everyone wanted to hang out with me. And from that point on, I saw food as an enemy. It was not something that gave me nutrition. It was something that made me fat. And I couldn't enjoy it for 25 years. I had 3 kids in Japan. Every time I got pregnant, I felt guilty about getting fat. I couldn't spend a day without exercising. I couldn't enjoy eating out. It was just a very miserable existence. And it's also a very self-condemning disease to have. You blame yourself. Why can I not eat? Everybody can just eat like normal people. Why can I not eat? And so I gave up, and I'm like, I'm just going to die this miserable existence because I can't seem to get this I did counseling. I tried gluten-free and vegetarian, all the different things. Nothing worked. But then I met Makiko, and Makiko said to me, let's heal your disease through Japanese food. And I laughed at her, and I'm like, do you know how much I hate to cook? I'm like, there's nothing more burdensome in the world than cutting a vegetable. Like, I hated doing that, I was the queen of like buying the half-priced bento lunches at the supermarket, I hated to cook. But because I loved Makiko and I loved hanging out with her, I'm like, well, let's go try. I'll try some of this Japanese cooking. And I found that as I learned how to cook, that my view of food changed. And I was starting to not feel guilty. I was starting to enjoy eating because I was doing it myself. But there was something still missing. And it was this word itadakimasu. And one day I was cooking with Makiko, and we were using eggs, and I have high cholesterol. So I was going to throw away the yolk and just use the white of the egg. And she got so mad at me. She's like, what are you doing? And I'm like, well, I have high cholesterol. I can't eat that. And she goes, don't you understand the word itadakimasu? And I was like, yeah, it means let's eat. She goes, no, it doesn't. She goes, itadakimasu means that you are partaking of life. And you need to be thankful to the animals and plants who gave their life for you, and to the people who grew that food and transported it to the supermarket, and your mother who cooked it for you, and the person who put it on the table. All of those people did all of this for you. And because of that, you have the right to eat. That's what itadakimasu means. And it was like, wow, it was like scales just fell from my eyes. And I was like, that's why Japanese people talk about food all day long. Has anyone ever noticed that? Turn on Japanese TV. Every single television program is about food. It's about food. Everything. That's all they talk about. Food. You know? And I go, why is that? You know? The Japanese vocabulary is rich in words to describe the texture and the taste of food, right? You'll see it turn on the TV and some talent is going around and he's going to some new store to try out food, and he'll say something like, 外はサクサク、中はふわふわで体中に温かさが染み渡るような, right? Use all of these onomatopoeic words to describe the taste and texture of food. Japanese kids in preschool, do you know what they do? They don't like play video games or draw pictures as much. You know what they do? They plant vegetables when they're 5 years old. They water them, they pick them, and then they make curry and rice together. Why is it? Why is a Japanese school lunch so healthy? It's so healthy. And this was a huge thing for me as a Christian who has never thought of the fact that I need to thank life. Because Christians thank the God who gave them the life, the food, right? But in a Japanese worldview, you actually thank the life directly. And this was just really revolutionary for me because it made me see food in a whole new way. And this revelation healed my eating disorder. I started to be able to eat normally again. And so I feel like Japanese culture saved me. The Japanese food culture saved my life, honestly. And the awesome thing about this is that I am an American country girl Christian, and the Shinto view of Japan saved my life. And this is a great view when you're talking about diversity. You know, you can have your viewpoints, you can have your values, you can have your belief systems, and we as people should hold on to them strongly. But that doesn't mean that there's not things we can learn from other people and other cultures. There is much rich truth and beauty in other cultures and other religions that we as people can learn and grow. So if I, as an American Christian, had said, you know what, I'm just going to pray more. I'm just going to have people pray for me. I'm just going to figure out something in my own country to heal myself of this eating disorder. I could be dead today. It's very possible. But because of the things that Japanese English taught me, and that I had to be humble and I had to be open to seeing things from a different perspective, I was able to be healed from that eating disorder and have the life that I have today that I would never have had if I hadn't have had that. And so, you know, when you go overseas, if any of you ever get the chance to go to Japan, I really, really want to encourage you that don't just go there and just say, I'm going to study Japanese. You need to study everything about Japan. You need to study their religious views. You need to study their entertainment culture. You need to study their education culture, their family roles, gender roles, all of these things. Because all of these things are necessary to see a full picture. And you cannot understand the Japanese language without understanding the Japanese culture and the worldview that undergirds that. And so I can honestly say as one that my life was totally changed by Japanese English and by the experiences that it gave me. And I became much less of a judgmental person. And I find myself much more willing to hear people and ask the question, why? Asking this why is very, very important. You know, if you just look at Japanese English on the surface, you're like, well, that's just weird English. Why can't they just use their own word, right? But if you ask the question, why? Well, why is Japanese English in existence? Why is it there? Then you can really understand the deeper purpose. And this can be applied to anything in life. You have a fight with your best friend. Well, that person just said something mean to me and I hate them and it's their fault. But have you ever thought about why you have a fight with your best friend? Maybe it's my fault. Maybe I said something insensitive and I didn't realize it. Maybe I'm not understanding this person well. Maybe I'm looking at them through my lenses and my worldview. Anytime you don't understand something or you feel frustrated, you always ask the question, why? Last year in November, I obtained Japanese citizenship, and it was one of the best days of my life. It was something that I had been really wanting to do for a long time. And I just was so happy, you know. It's like for a while, I was just like, you know what? No matter what happens in life, I'm Japanese, so that's okay. You know, I'd wake up in the morning and I'd be like, oh, I'm so tired, but I'm Japanese, so that's okay. My kids are fighting again, but I'm Japanese, that's okay. And it was just this joy that was just flowing out of me, you know. And then I do a lot of lectures in Japan about diversity and about gender equality and things like that. But I started tweeting about diversity after I naturalized. I just got just massive hate on Twitter. Never had so much hate in my life. And they would say something like, oh, you're just trying to change Japan like to be like America, aren't you? You're a spy. They called me a spy, you know. And they were like, you're just a gaijin with a Japanese passport. You know, I got death threats. I got hate mail to my university. It was just one of the most horrible things that ever has happened in my life. And at first I was really, really just traumatized and I couldn't do anything. But then I started asking why. Why are these people so scared of diversity? Why are they so scared of me? Like, I've spent my whole life just doing everything I can to just love Japan and work for Japanese society for the good. Why is it this happening? And I realized that they're scared of diversity because they think diversity is going to ruin their culture. They think that letting in immigrants is going to dilute the beauty of Japanese culture. They think that accepting other religions is going to make Japanese religions less important or less valued, you know. And so understanding that why was a really, now, of course, this is just a small percentage of people online in Japan. Most people are not like that, right? This is just a very, very small percentage of people. But up until then, I had been surrounded by people who love diversity, people like me who come to my lectures and want Japan to be a more diverse and more open and more accepting, inclusive society. But so I thought everyone wanted to be like me, right? And we have that tendency when we're just surrounded by people who are like us. We have the tendency to think everyone thinks like us, or everyone wants to be like us. You know, my whole life I was surrounded by Christians, and so I just assumed that everyone wanted to go to heaven after they die. But I was talking to my friend Makiko, and she goes, "Ooh, that doesn't sound fun." And I was like, "What do you mean?" She goes, I want to be reincarnated. That's way more fun." And I had never heard that perspective before because I'd always been surrounded by people who are like me. And so as much as I really suffered from the hate that I got online, now at this point, looking back, I'm very thankful for it because it helped me to see the why. It helped me to see Japanese society, helps me to understand that there is a pocket of people in Japanese society who don't think like I do, who don't want diversity because they're scared of it. And it helped me to see, well, how can you present diversity to them in a way that doesn't scare them or make them think that that's going to happen? And so it's been a huge benefit for my career. And so I try to look at everything, bad or good, as a learning experience in some way that it can make me a person of more understanding. You know, I think all of us have goals in life. You know, you want to be a successful researcher, you want to be a good Japanese speaker, you want to be a doctor, you want to be a lawyer, whatever. I have lots of goals. I want to be a commentator. I want to write lots of books. But to me, my biggest goal in life is I want to be a person of understanding. I want to be able to be around people who have entirely different views than I do and have a barbecue with them and talk in a rational, common, sane way with them about our belief systems and be able to really understand each other. And I think this is what's really lacking in American society and in Japanese society as well. The ability to really try to understand each other. It's impossible to completely understand people. You should give up on that. But in Japanese, it's 理解しようとする. It's to try to understand one, because you respect them as a person and you respect them as someone, and their beliefs, whether you believe them or not, their beliefs are important to them, right? And so it's important for us to try to, you know, understand that and believe. Of course, hate is unacceptable in any situation, in any culture, and you don't have to try to understand that or accept that. But different religious views, different values, these sort of things are incredibly important to understand. And, you know, we don't realize we have these things because of all these unconscious biases they were holding in our lives, you know? Like, for example, one of my students said to me one day, I asked him, I said, what's your image of of Muslims. And she was like, I don't like Muslims. And I was like, why? Well, they don't eat pork. And I said, well, let's think about this rationally. I said, why is it a bad thing that they don't eat pork? And she said, well, pork's delicious. And I said, pork's delicious to you, but this person's never eaten pork, so they don't know if it's delicious. And because you're not religious, you see it as her being restricted because you're not religious. But to her, she's not being restricted. She willingly gives up pork, or he willingly gives up pork because for his or her God. And it's not a restriction at all. You may see it as a shibari or as a restriction, but that person doesn't see it at all. You're looking at Islam through your lenses. And she was like, that's right. Right. And so we tend to do that, just like I looked at Japanese in English through the lenses of a native English speaker. So I really want to encourage you guys, if you ever have a chance to go to Japan and study or live, to always, it's a crazy different culture than America. Like nothing is the same. Nothing. The first 6 months, you'll probably hate it like I did. And then if you think it's like manga or anime, then you're going to be disappointed because it's not. It's not the perfect manga or anime world. There's mean people. There's hateful people. There's crazy people, just like you'll find in any country, So don't go over there thinking it's like this perfect society like you're going to find in manga or anime. You'll be disappointed and your heart will be crushed and you'll be home in a month, There is good and bad in every culture. There's good and bad in every society. And you can't go over there with any kind of preconceived notions or idealistic views of it, But it is a wonderful, wonderful country. I have to give up my U.S. citizenship because I became a Japanese citizen. That's a huge decision to make, but it's one I made with zero hesitation because it's my home and it's where I want to live the rest of my life. And although I love the U.S. and what it's done for me, and I love that I was brought up here, it's not my home, And so it is a beautiful, beautiful country with beautiful, beautiful people. And I really hope that you get the chance to experience it. But if you do get the chance to experience it, I really encourage you to go there with an open mind, not with the mind of a native English speaker or your particular religion or your particular values, but really go over there and just be open to what Japanese culture has to teach you and how it can make you a better person and how it can help you to grow as a person. And that's something that Waseigo, Japanese English, has taught me. I know that I kind of, you're probably not the kind of talk you're expecting when we were talking about only language, but to me, everything is connected. Language, culture, and worldview are so connected. You can't talk about one without the other. And so I always want you to always keep that in mind if you ever get a chance to go over there. You guys are lucky. I never studied Japanese in college. I never had that chance. I didn't start studying until I was an adult. So, if you do go there, please learn the language as quickly as you can. It's so important. Please listen to your teachers here. They know what they're talking about. Really, they know what they're talking about. You will be so much happier if you can speak a language. Your quality of life will be so much better if you can understand Japanese. So anyway, this concept of ikai is something that I think is something that's lacking in the world. And if we had this, I think people would be a lot happier all over the world than they are. Just remember, there's not always a right, and you're not always right, whether it's regarding language or human relationships or anything. And I should thank you for listening. I know I went over a little bit. Sorry about that. But I got a lot of English books on Amazon. If you're interested in my English books, are on Amazon. But my Japanese books are on Japanese Amazon. I have 4 books. And anyone who wants to contact me on Twitter, my Twitter has calmed down now, so it's a safe place. So please come to my Twitter or YouTube. I have an English channel. A Japanese channel on YouTube. So yeah, thanks for listening. And if you have any questions, I'd love to chat with you guys and interact. So
Thank you, Professor Crescini. So we'll open the floor for questions. We have some time for a few questions from both our in-person and online audience. And unfortunately, we are not passing around the microphone. So if you have a question, please ask the question loud, really loud, and project your voice for the online audience, because this small guy, this is the embedded microphone, ready to project your voice to this guy. Okay. Any question?
Thank you for your talk. It was really fascinating. I remember somebody telling me once lived there, and I don't remember when this was, if it was the 1980s. don't bet on that, but a gentleman sued a television broadcaster, maybe NHK, for how many loan words they were using. He said it was abusive and it hurt his ears, and he just couldn't handle like all these loan words coming at him. And I was wondering if you knew the outcome of it, because I don't really know what happened, if he won or not. And you know, if you see these moments of tension where there's pushback coming out, you know, against these loan words, and whether or not there's sort of a new pushback against that, you know, going to visit the new verbs you're saying, like, what are these moments of tension against?
That's a really good question. I have heard about that court case. I'm not sure of the outcome, but I very seriously doubt that person won, because it's impossible to win any court cases in Japan almost. But there is a lot of tension, especially in the older community. The older people really hate the use of the katakana words, especially on the news. Words like commit to ka, incentive, what else? So many. Infrastructure to ka. There's all these different words, and they hate it because they don't understand it and they can't understand their own language, and so they get frustrated. My stance as a linguist is, I don't think you should use a Japanese loan word if there is a good Japanese equivalent. For example, recently unconscious bias is becoming popular, but you can say muishiki no henken and it means the same thing. So, and people understand that very easily. They understand muishiki no henken is very clear. So, but they don't understand unconscious bias. So, I don't really understand why we have to use words in Japanese that have a Japanese equivalent. So the original purpose of loan words was to fill like a linguistical gap. So there's not a word, and so we have to borrow it. But then it's kind of morphed into it's cool, so I want to use it. And so people who speak English well, or are interested in English, tend to use words that they think are cool, that sound cool. But the problem is, you know, if a native speaker can't understand their native language, that's a problem, right? That's a huge problem. And so I think, especially politicians are really bad about it. They use a lot of, especially the governor of Tokyo. She's famous for using loan words that nobody understands, you know. But it's. I think, like everything, it's a compromise, and it's understanding. I think they shouldn't be used if they're not understood by the majority of the population. Some words, like during COVID, there was this word that they used called overshoot. And overshoot was like kansen bakuhatsu. So like there would be like a massive explosion of COVID infections. And everybody was like, what the heck is this weird word, overshoot? Nobody understands this word. And everybody hated it so much they got rid of it. You know, so every now and then that does happen. They do get rid of words that are not really, really well understood. But it's a constant tension, especially like in each field. For example, in a certain field like a business or IT, there'll be the loan words that are used only in that field. And so they'll just use those words like crazy, but then they'll not know that they're only used in their field, and then they'll try to use them with people outside of their field, and they don't understand them. And so those people get frustrated. And then people who live here, like all your senseis, they use katakana words that are not used in Japan. And so then they go back to Japan, and then they're not understood because they think they're real katakana words, but they're not. They're just words used in the Japanese community in the States. So that's another problem. You know, like one day one of my friends said, ねえ、私の husband はアメリカのミリタリーに入ってて、でも、インシュランスがなくて、like she was talking like this. And she was making all of these katakana words that are not really katakana words. And she goes back into Japan and she says, husbando, nobody's going to understand that. Or I've got to pick up my kid, pick up suru. We don't say that in Japan. We say omukai, right? So I think there's just a lot of tension between different communities, and certain loan words are understood by the entire population. Words like recycle, business, smartphone, internet. These are words understood by everyone. Several years ago, there was a bunkacho study about how well loan words were understood. But then there's a lot of words like incentive or accountability or words like this that are put in katakana. They're not understood by hardly anyone. And then there's words that are understood in one field but not in another, right? So the level of comprehension of loan words depends on your work, your position in society, depends on your work, and it depends on your age, right? A lot of the loanwords, like probably a lot of you don't know the word dizuru, which is to go to Disneyland, which is only used by the young people in Tokyo. It's not even used in Fukuoka. So there's these regional differences in loanword usage as well that you're going to find a lot too. So, and then there's the young people, you know, the youth slang versus the ones that are understood by everyone. And so, you know, it's a really hard call. But personally, I was really annoyed when people started calling Ringo juice apple juice, because I'm like, why do we have to call Ringo juice apple juice? Why can't we just call it Ringo juice? Everybody understands Ringo, you know. But there are certain differences in loanwords and in native words. For example, they use the word, for example, they'll use tamago for egg, but they'll also say egu. They'll use both words. But the purpose of tamago and egg in the Japanese language are entirely different. An egg is only used as an ingredient in something, whereas tamago is the actual specific egg, right? Like you would never say, please go to the store and buy me an egg. You would never say that. But you would go to a bakery and find a bacon egg sandwich, right? So they're not always used in the same way, just like colors as well. Green is used to describe things that people make, like clothing or cars, green. But you would never look at a tree and say, that tree is green. You would never use green for something to describe nature. You would use midori, which is the native word, right? So it's just a really endless field of study. Like there's all kinds of ways to use loanwords. Some people understand both, some people don't understand any. And so the level of understanding just varies on generation, on your area, and everything. So it's a really, really hard thing to solve. And the loanwords are just increasing massively, like every day. Like every day something new comes in. I hear a new word that I didn't know, you know. And so it's definitely a very fascinating field.
I was wondering more about the television show that you do and what the format is. It is about food or culture, and how
I don't-
you speak in English on this?
No, I don't have any like regular TV shows. I do mainly just like specials. Like last year I was on this show called Matsuko no Shiranai Sekai in Japan about to talk about Japanese English there. I don't ever speak in English, no. That's why I get nervous when I have to speak in English, because
Do people ask you questions about you because of your appearance as a person, a Caucasian like myself, and doing this in your level
No.
of Japanese? Is it like my
No.
level of German, which was horrible, or just
no,
good, or-
I hope my Japanese is pretty
I mean, to
good.
the people that
I'm not quite sure, because you know it's hard to evaluate your own language ability, but I mean I can live and work with no problems on a daily basis in Japanese. It's not perfect, of course. I mean, I learned Japanese as an adult.
are there
so-
different accents that people have in Japan?
Oh, sure. There's lots of different, not just accents, but the entire vocabulary is different depending on where you live. And so you could not understand, like someone in northern Japan can't understand someone in southern Japan. They speak so differently. But you know, it all depends on how you define fluency. I mean, I don't speak like a native speaker because I have an accent, and I don't know all the vocabulary words, but I can communicate perfectly, or almost perfectly in Japanese.
That's remarkable.
I don't really know if it's remarkable.
Well, in my opinion,
I appreciate the compliment, but it's kind of mainly just I've just worked my tail off. You know, I think
Yeah.
anyone who works really hard can speak Japanese. I don't really believe in like natural born talent or whatever. I mean, I do think there is a certain aspect of it. I do think some people might have more linguistic or language ability than others, but
That's true.
I really think anyone who works hard and tries can do anything that they want. Am I saying something you agree with?
Yes.
So you know, if someone says to me like you have some kind of magic like Japanese power, I'm just like, no. Do you know how many hours I did word cards and wrote kanjis and stuff? But I appreciate the compliment. That makes me feel happy. So
It's sincere. believe me.
thank you. Any more questions?
We'll take our next question from our online audience, and we have a question from our very old alumni. He is he's a second generation Japanese American, he say, and 87 year of them alumni of CJS when it was called Far Eastern Literature and Language. And okay, his question is, so I will quote, when I speak Japanese and non-Japanese people around me are listening, they comment that it has a musical quality to it, perhaps rooted in poetry or uta. I think that the Gairaigo maybe has a poetic and musical approach rather than a literal quality to it. hence the disconnect between the root American English and Waseigo. Any thoughts on it, please?
I do think it does have quite a poetical kind of sound to it because, it does sound quite unique, I think, but at the same time, it is adapted into the Japanese phonetical system. So it's pronounced in the same way, although it has different rules than native Japanese loanwords do. For example, anyone who's who studies linguistics knows the geminates and stuff like that, but there's voice geminate stops in Japanese are, for example, like gu or do or something like that. In loanwords, there's a chisaitsu, like a small letter tsu, like bag gu or hot dog gu, right? So there's these sounds. These sounds are allowed in loanwords, but they're not allowed in Wago or Kango. And so you'll never hear a native Japanese word that has a gu after a chisaitsu. You'll never find a word like that in Japanese. And so it does have a little bit different phonetical rules, which is kind of an interesting thing. I did a study when I was in grad school. And most people, when they write hot dog, they'll write hot dog gu. But when they say it, they'll say hot dog ku, because they unconsciously know that this sound is prohibited in Wago and Kango. And so they unconsciously devoice that sound, which I found to be very interesting. And so that's why a lot of people, if you ask an American, what's an American dog ku, they won't understand it because they're not thinking of dog gu. They're thinking of dog ku, right? And so they can't understand what a ku is. And so that's also a very fascinating aspect if you study loanwords from a phonological perspective, I think. But it is very it does sound to me very poetical as well. But I think a lot of you and native speakers are probably the same too. It's a lot harder to read katakana words fast than it is to read kanji or hiragana. I used to hate going to karaoke and there would be a song that had a lot of katakana in it because I couldn't read it fast enough. I couldn't keep up with the rhythm. And I think that's something even native speakers really struggle with. Like nobody can pronounce my name. It's very fascinating. My name in Japanese is Crescini, which katakana is something they learn in first grade. And so most of them are supposed to be able to read it. But when someone looks at my name, they can't read it all of a sudden. It's like they have this panic, like there's a katakana word in front of me. And people call me like kurushimi, which means suffering. And they confuse it and stuff. And so I think that katakana is a very different animal than hiragana or kanji. And I think it has its own purpose and it does have a very lyrical sound to it. But there are people who dislike it because it's just so long. Like, Japanese has moras and not syllables, if you look at it from a linguistical setting. And so, the English word, for example, sprite in English is just one syllable, but it's tsuburaito. It's 5 mora in Japanese. And so those things, I think a lot of people probably get irritated having to move their mouth so much to speak in katakana words as well. But I do think I like it, but it's very important for when we learn, when non-native speakers learn Japanese, to really try to speak katakana words with the katakana accent or the Japanese way and not say like,めちゃくちゃ hot dog 食べたいとか、そんなになくて、you should try to say it just like you would say it, and it needs to be treated as Japanese. Katakana, Gairaigo, and Waseigo both need to be treated and respected as complete, real 100% members of the Japanese language family. So, any more questions?
I was just curious, now that we live in a much more globalized, interconnected society brought on by, especially modern technology, the internet, and the like, how has that affected the proliferation and creation of loan words? You mentioned before, like with tapioca pearls, how that came out of fashion really quick. There's all of a sudden these new loan words related to the pandemic, and people are able to communicate overseas now much more easily with one another and remain connected in different places. And so I'm curious how that's affected the creation or maybe just the removal of some loan words and how quickly they may fall into fashion.
Yeah, it's really fast. I mean, tapioca was here and gone in like 2 years, maybe. It's really fast. And then, a lot of the social media words, Japanese call it SNS. I think that's a Waseigo word too, but with a lot of social media words. And then there's also the cross influence of the Korean culture. There's a lot of Japanese English words that are also used in Korea, which is very interesting, like SNS, and skinship, which is like physical affection. They use the word skinship to show physical affection. And then there's words that are, reversed, imported into English from Waseigo, which like words like anime, words like cosplay, what else? Karaoke is a loan word, so yeah, karaoke. But it's more interesting when Waseigo words get adapted into English. Words like idol is probably going to be used in English pretty soon. Up until now, Idol has been more like American Idol, like a huge celebrity like Taylor Swift or Justin Bieber, but it's not been really a job like it is in Japan. In Japan, an idol is a job. Like you're an idol. I want to be an idol. And that from the influence of J-pop and especially K-pop, I think, the influence that they've had on U.S. Entertainment culture, I think it's not going to be long before the word idol is firmly entrenched in English. And it's going to be referred to as a job. Like my youngest daughter actually is in April is moving to Korea to be a K-pop renshusei, trainee. And she's been studying the language and stuff, but she actually is like, I want to be an idol. Like that's what her job that she's trying to be. That hasn't really made its way into English quite yet, but I think it's on its way. Another word is talento, which is also a job. In Japanese, it's kind of like someone who's on TV, but they're not really like an actress or a musician, but they're just kind of like a celebrity kind of person. That person is called a talent in Japanese. I think that is probably going to find its way over to English before long as well. And that happened a couple times. I was reading an English language article about Johnny's jimusho, Johnny's the SMAPs, and all of their scandal they had with their scandal. But I read some English articles and it called them talents in the English article. They said Johnny is accused of abusing their talents, is what it said. So it's actually using talent in the same way it was used in Japanese, which I found fascinating. So I do think with the global world that we're coming in, that not only is English and other languages impacting Japanese, but Japanese is being reverse imported into English. And then with the K-pop boom that's going on in Japan too, you get a mixture of Korean words and Japanese words are starting to be mixed together. Like a couple of years ago, there was this famous young people slang called 진짜 소리나, which means like 진짜 is Korean for like really, like 마지대. And then like 소리나 is like, I know, right? And so it was like 마지대 소리나, kind of like that kind of feeling. So it was half Korean and half Japanese. 진짜 소리나. And so it's just an endless just possibility for new word creation. And I think as the world just becomes more and more globalized, that we're just going to constantly impact and influence each other. And so I think that a lot of this criticism about that's not English, or I think it's going to eventually fade away because language is just going to become so intertwined that people kind of like globalism too. Like people just become so intertwined that people stop thinking, "Oh, I'm Filipino American," or blah blah blah. Like I called myself American Japanese once in Japan. I mean, since I naturalized, and this guy on Twitter, he's like, "There's no such thing." And I was like, well, there will be in a few years. I'm going to make the word now. You guys make pipe cuts. So, if you can make pipe cut, I can make American Japanese, So I think as people become more, as people start interacting more and it becomes a more global world, I think both language and people it's going to be a much more tolerant view towards both, I think.
We have time for one final question.
Sure.
So I have two questions. One, but she's my student, so she can ask a question later. So if you have any question from in-person audience, sure.
As like a non-binary individual, like I know when I visited Japan, my younger cousin, he would like call me like Oni-chan, like because I was visiting for a month. And like I was just wondering like how the impact of like in a very conformist and a very collectivist sort of society, sort of identities, mental health disorders and whatnot that are very prevalent here in the West tend to get interpreted and translated into the Japanese.
I need about an hour for that one. Japan is becoming a more tolerant society towards sexuality and towards mental health. It's becoming more aware, but it's still probably about 30 years behind the US, I would say. You know, because Japan doesn't have pronouns used commonly, that the use of pronouns is not really an issue like it would be in the States, but how did you feel when they called you? Did you like that or did you not?
It was strange coming into it because I came into it with an American mindset of that means older sister. But I kind of slowly began to understand that it was really just the only word that he could really think of. Because he's, 7.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, you thought it was non-binary as well. And I think she's a very famous person who has kind of opened up the gender conversations in Japan. But there is a huge mental health crisis in Japan, just like all over the world. I mean, there's 4 students in my daughter's class who are truant, who don't go to school. They call Japanese Fukuoka. The kids who don't go to school for some reason are just increasing like crazy. There is a lot more understanding gradually. I mean, everything in Japan takes forever to change. But for example, most schools have genderless uniforms now, so they allow students to choose pants or skirt. They're allowing boys in certain schools to wear sailor blue or whatever. So there is a little bit more of an understanding, but towards lesbians and gays, but regarding non-binary, regarding transgender, that's still way people really don't really have much understanding at all towards gender identity, I think. And so there's a lot of education and I think still needs to go on. And I do think there's a lot of people who are just really, living a life that's not really they're afraid, to come out because they're afraid to go and understand. And I think 8 to 12% of the Japanese population just identifies as LGBT. But if you go, when I go to a lecture and I ask people, do you have any LGBT friends or family? Nobody, 10% of the people raise their hand, which means that obviously that people don't feel comfortable yet coming out. I mean, it is changing, but nowhere near the speed that happens in the States. So, but there is a higher focus on gender identity and mental health and stuff. It's gradually changing. I mean, in 25 years, it's just crazy that the way it's changed. Like when I first came, nobody ever talked about anything LGBT related. And the other day, one of my students gave a presentation and talked about how she was non-binary. And that never would have happened 25 years ago. And so I was like, wow, it's really changing. The site is really changing. So I think people need to be patient in Japan. I think that it's not going to change at the speed of the US. And I think that, people need to understand that it is changing, but it's a very hard place where not just regarding gender identity, but regarding everything. I mean, they hate change in general for everything, And so, but I can say with certainty that in the past 25 years, there has definitely been a move in a positive direction regarding diversity and tolerance and inclusion. And hopefully you can go to Japan and we can help, start that conversation up again and get people educated because there's not, from my experience, with the exception of Twitter, which is like a totally different world, there's not a lot of that blatant racism in Japan where people just hate you and just hate you. It's more of just a lack of understanding, a lack of exposure, a lack of information. We just don't know, and they'll make intolerant comments or racist comments or something, not because they're trying to hurt you because they don't like you, but they're just uneducated. That's been my experience. Of course, there's going to be racist people, in other countries, or people who are. But on Twitter, people are just mean and hateful. But in daily life, it's not so much. But yeah, I hope we get a chance to go someday and help educate people more.
So I'm afraid that's all the time we have for questions today. And please join me in thanking Professor and
Thank you.
Crescini.